Hey everyone, welcome back to Matt's Digital Odyssey. I'm your host, Matt Marlatt. Today we're diving into something that's got gamers buzzing, the Nintendo Switch 2. Yes, the long-awaited successor to one of the most beloved gaming consoles of all time is on the horizon. And there's lots to unpack, from hardware upgrades to why backwards compatibility is a deciding factor for me. The Switch 2 is shaping up to be a big leap for Nintendo and gaming in general. Now I have to admit, I wasn't really a diehard Nintendo fan growing up. I was more of a Sega kid. I didn't own a Super Nintendo or even an N64, although I really wanted one when it came out. I was in middle school at the time and didn't really have the funds to pick one up. By the time the GameCube rolled around, I had moved on to the OG Xbox and PS2. Nintendo wasn't even really on my radar at that point. I ended up skipping the GameCube entirely until years later when I got one on clearance for $50, brand new. And even then, I wasn't really fully on board with Nintendo. I skipped the Wii and the Wii U completely. But all that changed in 2017 when the Switch came out. Super Mario Odyssey was the game that pulled me back in. And it wasn't just a return to the magic of 3D Mario, it was the game that reminded me how much I missed Nintendo's creativity. Since then, I've gone all in on the Switch. I've invested in a collection of physical titles, some of which are rare, like the Final Fantasy 1-6 Collection, Anniversary Edition, which is a re-release, the Jurassic Park Games Collection, Breath of the Wild with the Explorer's Map, Sonic Origins Plus, Sonic Mania Plus, and various games styled like classic editions, like the VHS of Shredder's Revenge, Doom 64 that looks like a Nintendo 64 cart, and Scott Pilgrim vs. the World in a giant Genesis cart. So as you can imagine, I have a big stake in what happens with the Switch 2, especially when it comes to backwards compatibility. So grab a coffee, settle in, and let's dive into everything we know about the Nintendo Switch 2 and why backwards compatibility really is a critical factor for me. So let's start with a bit of history. Nintendo has always been the king of doing things differently. While other companies were chasing raw power and photorealistic graphics, Nintendo was out there saying, what if we just made our games more fun? And the Switch was the perfect example of that. Launched in 2017, the Switch was a hybrid console that let you play on your TV and then pick it up and go on the handheld. It sounded ambitious and maybe even a little risky, but it worked. The portability, the exclusive games like Breath of the Wild and Super Mario Odyssey, and then the family-friendly design that made it a massive hit, for me especially. Mario Odyssey was the game that sold me on the Switch in the first place. That whimsical world, the creative gameplay, it was everything I wanted from a new Mario game, and more. But before the Switch, my relationship with Nintendo was pretty much non-existent at that point. As I mentioned earlier, I skipped the GameCube, the Wii, and the Wii U entirely. Motion controls weren't really my thing. I did get a Kinect for the Xbox 360, and the reason for that was I was a beta tester for it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have it. And the Wii U just didn't feel compelling. I remember being in a GameStop at the time and someone brought in their entire Xbox collection and console for a Wii U. They even ended up trading some of the exact same games for new versions of that on Wii U. Oh, I bet they regret that decision now. And the reason I got my GameCube was because I decided to keep one. I ended up buying an entire stock at Walmart because the console was $49.99 with a copy of Paper Mario Thousand Year Door. That's right, I wish I had waited a little bit on those ones, but I ended up selling the games and the console separately and ultimately got to keep one myself. But it wasn't until the Switch that I saw Nintendo was really hitting its stride again. We didn't have another Virtual Boy on our hands here. And now the Switch 2 feels like the next logical step. At least they didn't call it the Switch U or something weird like that. Or the Super Switch, which would have been okay, but still weird. The big question is though, can Nintendo recapture that magic? And just as importantly, will it support our existing game libraries? For me, backwards compatibility isn't just a nice feature. I love physical copies. I probably have over 100 Switch games now. I want to be able to play them. Like myself, people invest hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars into physical games. Having to start fresh with a new console, that's a tough sell. Okay, so let's get to what we know so far. Nintendo has actually been pretty tight-lipped about the specs. We don't even have official specs yet. Personally, I'm hoping for it to be on par with the PS4 or the original Xbox One. That would be a good balance of power while keeping it affordable and accessible. Backwards compatibility is another big question, and guess what? It's going to be backwards compatible with most games. And most likely it won't work with games that rely on the original Joy-Cons, like Ring Fit Adventure or the Labo series. Seriously, what am I supposed to do with all that cardboard from Labo? I mean, it was a creative idea and it was fun to put together, but if those games don't work on a new console, it's just going to collect more dust for me. Now, it might sound crazy, but for me, backwards compatibility is absolutely essential. It's actually one of the main reasons I didn't buy a PS5 and decided to get an Xbox Series X instead. And sure, the PS5 is really powerful, but the lack of true backwards compatibility made me stick with buying an Xbox instead, and just keeping my PS4 Pro and my modded PS3. They both let me play pretty much the entire PlayStation library on my HD TV anyways, so I didn't get a PS5 and I just decided to stick with Xbox. And honestly, backwards compatibility is about more than just the convenience. It's about preserving gaming history. And the Switch has an incredible game library, pretty much of any console. With titles like Breath of the Wild, Animal Crossing New Horizons, Super Smash Bros., and even Mario Kart, they're not just games, they're experiences people have poured countless hours into. And as someone who's invested heavily in a lot of physical libraries, I would love to see these games carry over seamlessly. It's not just about replaying them either. It's about the accessibility for new gamers who might discover the Switch 2 and want to explore the library that came before it. As someone who's a collector, if a game is physically out for all three consoles, I stick with the Switch version. Essentially, I don't really need the download unless it's a certain game that only requires downloads to play, but then there's physical editions that are just amazing to have. Like I mentioned, the Final Fantasy collection, or some of my really cool collector's edition. I get them on Switch so I can play them portably and play them at home. Now, that all being said, I get that backwards compatibility can be tricky, especially when hardware changes. The jump from the PS3 to the PS5 is hard to emulate. Then there's the original Switch's Joy-Cons. The motion controls, the IR sensors, the HD rumble, it's all unique, but there's no guarantee that those features won't be available in the new Joy-Cons, as long as they don't have stick drift. Still, I think Nintendo could find ways to support most of the library without leaving a lot of fans behind. Now, unfortunately, this is all still speculation because we don't know what games will be backwards compatible and which ones won't. Nintendo's gone on the record saying that most will, but there's probably going to be about 10%, maybe 5% that isn't. Looking ahead, I think the Nintendo Switch has the potential to be a defining moment for the gaming industry, much more than the Wii U was. If they get the balance right, powerful new hardware, exciting exclusive titles, and that backwards compatibility that lets you play all of your original Nintendo Switch games on it, well, at least most of them, it could cement Nintendo's legacy for another generation. But it's a big if. Consoles have stumbled in the past because they didn't meet player expectations or just failed to innovate. Nintendo has always been great at thinking outside the box, though, and I really hope they decide to keep that spirit alive with the Switch too. The broader gameplay landscape is changing too. Cloud gaming, AI-driven features, and even how games are marketed and monetized is evolving rapidly. The Switch 2 is arriving at a pivotal time, and I can't wait to see how it fits into the next era of gaming. Although Nintendo did get a little bit of blowback for their teaser not really looking polished, it was still pretty exciting if you ask me. And if all else fails, we'll still have a giant library of games that we can play over and over and over. And that wraps up today's episode of Matt's Digital Odyssey. What are your thoughts on the Nintendo Switch 2? Are you excited about the potential hardware upgrade, or are you more focused on the backwards compatibility like I am? Or are you just going to stick with what you have? Hit me up on social media at Marlat Media. Next time, we're going to dive into collecting digital games, and do you actually own them? I've invested a lot of time and money into my Steam collection, my digital libraries on all my consoles, and with recent developments of those games not actually being yours. So until then, keep exploring, keep dreaming, and I'll see you in the next Odyssey.